Okay. So our foundation mainly supports academic research in the humanities and social sciences, and we were set up by the Swedish National Bank in the mid-1960s. And we have a capital of, depending on the market value, it's somewhere close to 2 billion euros. So we support mainly research projects with about 55 million euros a year, something like that. And we mostly work with bottom-up proposals. So we have researchers proposing research projects that they want to do. And then we have a big external assessment process where they're looked at these proposals by peers, other researchers in the Nordic and European countries. And then a small number of projects are suggested for funding. And then our board decides who to fund. And so one of the quality aspects that our peer review organization looks at is, of course, societal relevance. And in these past few years, we see more and more of the proposals that are being put forward for funding have various aspects of the developmental goals within them. Because we firmly believe that in order to solve the world's problem, you really need the perspectives of the humanities and social sciences, because they're all about how people work and work together and how to understand, how to implement change and development. So in that sense, you could say that without having sustainability in our statutes, we actually, because it's become such a relevant issue for all of society, we have ended up funding quite a lot of projects that in different ways approach the developmental goals. I think that we have an interesting composition in our board, because it's set up by half politicians from the Swedish Parliament and half senior academics from the world of research. So in our board discussions, actually, the political sphere meets academia in a very interesting way, and we try to understand each other's worlds. And for academics, research needs to be slow, and it needs to be set up in a way so that the questions you ask will actually be answered by the research process. Politicians, on the other hand, they require fast answers to pressing problems that they need to make decisions on laws and funding and so forth. And the meeting of these two worlds, I think, is one of the responsibility a foundation that, like us, can have. So we also make sure that the researchers we fund meet politicians in various settings and have a conversation about the importance of using academic research to have a knowledge base in which to tackle the developmental challenges. And I think moving forward, because things are so pressing, the world is in a crisis, we need to move fast, the different pace that good research and political policy making have, that is a challenge moving forward for our foundation, trying to get these two worlds to collaborate. Well, this was, we have a long tradition, as you've seen in this conference, of the Nordic foundations working together in various ways. And this started actually as a conversation between us and one of the Finnish foundations, and precisely about this thing, making academia and politicians meet. And then it grew from there, so trying to find a way of not boxing in the researchers too hard, because that's important for all of us, that research questions need to really emanate from the researchers themselves. So we just have a larger, loosely formulated theme, and then we set up the call so that it would also encourage Nordic cooperation. Because we feel, and I think this conference underlines this, that the special setup of the Nordic welfare societies, even though there are great differences, of course, among us, We have a certain way of structuring our society and our politics that make tackling the developmental goals, it needs a particular take. And so we think we can learn from each other and work together. So we set up this call so that researchers from at least 3 Nordic countries should be involved in the project proposals. And as you may have heard, we were completely overwhelmed. We had 450 mostly excellent proposals, and we could fund 11 of these. So, you know, it showed us that within the world of research, there is also a very strong feeling about the urgent issues that needs to be tackled, and a willingness to work together within the Nordic countries to come up with a better understanding of what needs to be done. Well, like I said, we have these very bottom-up principles, so we really don't want to be too prescriptive in what we want researchers to do. But we have experienced in the last 5 or 6 years that researchers themselves very much want to focus on the problems that are connected to the developmental goals, and also that our peer review organization has this societal relevance criteria when they look at the quality of the proposals, and so they are also forwarding proposals. So more and more, without us being very prescriptive and controlling, we are moving into more and more research of that. But we also, of course, as a foundation that has a large capital that we invest and an office, we also look at what we do ourselves. So in 2020, we asked the consultants that we use for internal auditing, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to make a special audit of our foundation, how we could work more sustainably. And it turned out that we'd had actually an environmental policy already in 2012, but that didn't align with this whole broader concept of the development goals and sustainability thinking. So with them, we took a look at all of our operations, and they made a certain number of recommendations that we have implemented since. And we also monitor our investments and follow closely the environmental impact, and have an investment policy that really makes us invest in stocks and operations that are working in a positive way towards the sustainability goals. So I think that across the board, there are lots of things you can do as a foundation, even if, as in our case, the money that we give out, that is decided through our statutes, and they were, of course, not at all formulated with the ESG in mind. But even if we have this bottom-up peer review process, we've seen that the money that we do give out in grants is actually more and more used even in our sector towards the ESG. So I think that if you look at the whole scope of your operations, and that was one of the points in the discussion we had yesterday, that you can do things in a very direct way, so you can measure your own impact as a foundation or what you do in your investments, but then probably also one step removed, as in our case with the grants that we're giving out, we can see that that's also working with the ESG. So, and I think that's true for many of the foundations here. Well, we think that one of the good things about the Nordic system, and that's also very important, is the governance aspects of the ESG, and being transparent, being fair, avoiding conflicts of interest, not on bias and things like that. And I think that in the Nordic countries we have a tradition through the way our governmental and political systems are set up, that makes the foundations also sort of in that arena compared to some of my European foundation colleagues, and I see that we work in a more open way. I think that there is a tendency in society at large, and also perhaps in the Nordic countries, to slightly move away from this, and it has also to do with if you have a democratic and open system, it's also quite slow in making decisions. And this is a little bit of a collision with the urgency of the state of the world and the need to make very quick decisions and to be active. And I think both then for foundations such as ours and also maybe the Nordic political systems, there is a conflict arising about the slow workings of democracy and the urgency and speed needed to tackle some of the societal changes. And we saw this, for example, during the pandemic, when the regular slow workings of democratic decision-making were put aside for a problem that was perceived and was very urgent, but that also led to some decisions that afterwards have been questioned. For example, here in Denmark, you had the incident with the mink industry, and that afterwards was considered to be a decision that set the democratic processes aside. And I think with the ESG, the same risk might be happening for the foundation world and the political world in the Nordics. I think that we work well together with our public institutions. I think that in some parts of the world that's impossible or not desired for various reasons. But I think that our experience in the Nordic countries is that you have more impact if you align yourself also with the public institutions. So if there's one thing I would wish for the world's philanthropy is to find routes to work in harmony with the political institutions of the respective countries. I think philanthropy becomes more effective then.